Hello, it's Motzie, and this was supposed to be a B-sides recording, but the one thing I forgot to ask for this B-sides is questions, which is what the B-sides are for in the first place. Because I've been so busy getting ready to fly out next week that I completely blanked on the one thing that we're supposed to do for B-sides.
And it didn't occur to me to remind you because I've also been really busy.
Yeah, it was just one of those things.
Oopsies.
You're like, Leia, let's record the B-sides. Absolutely. Okay, we'll schedule it out. Yeah, we're scheduled. Yeah,
we totally have the time this week. Does this time work for you? Oh, yeah, totally. We forgot to ask you for questions, dear listeners. Sorry about that.
Yes, but we didn't want to leave you hanging, so instead I'm going to do something I was planning to do anyway. I was going to do it on my own, but then I was like, well, we're here now, and I don't want to waste Edward's time, and I also like chatting with Edward, so we are actually going to chat about.
And I don't want to waste your time, and I enjoy chatting with you, so...
Yippee! So yes, we are actually going to continue a little bonus feature that we did for Pride, but did not finish. So it's an unscripted bonus feature about the queer characters of Hainai.
Mm-hmm.
And for this episode, we're also going to include the queer and trans characters of Hainai. In particular, Edward's character, Danny.
Hello.
Yes, that's Danny.
That's
oh my
my
God.
boy.
Yes,
That's
Danny,
my
boy, duh.
I came up with that pun, by the way. I don't know if we discussed this in a previous episode.
Oh my gosh, I forgot. It's been so long.
Yeah, Motzie asked me what his last name should be, and I was like, okay, well, you know the song Danny Boy, right? What if his last name is Boyd? And we laughed about that for 10 minutes straight before you finally went, okay, no, that it can't be anything else.
Yeah, no, for real. And I mean, we have incorporated that into the story as well. I believe that it was in the episode that Danny premiered in that we had, the Danny Boy song being played, being sung. And, yeah, that's just his song now. That's just his song now.
Yep.
As with many of the other characters having a song. And yes, today we're going to be discussing different queer and trans characters of Hainai. We're going to be continuing on from the last episode where we talked about the main cast, and a few others that were requested. But this time we're going to be talking about the wonderful Danny and Sauvard, and I asked Edward to perhaps join me in discussing their relationship and Danny's identity, because we did realize, thanks to some wonderfully astute listeners who remember things even I don't remember, we asked him to, we know listener Alex, right? So
yeah.
we were asking, hey, we know Danny's trans. It was in the preview image for his premiere episode. And we have since talked about Danny being trans on various unscripted episodes, and of course on the Discord, etc., etc. And Edward is also trans, so it's like, oh yeah, Danny's trans, there we go. But I don't think we ever actually mentioned it in an episode.
No, I don't think we did at all. It didn't really come up in the recording, and I know because I had to read that recording twice because I flubbed several lines so many times. I could still probably recite half of that monologue from memory just because of how many times I had to read it over to myself.
Oh, my lord.
I was very nervous for that first recording, y'all. I did not want to mess it up in any way.
Oh, but you did great. Danny is a beloved
I did very
character.
good. I'm very proud of myself.
I
love Danny so much. He's
love
my
him
favorite
so
boy.
Much. Yes, he went from being a one-episode Andy to being one of the most important side characters of the show.
Which is hysterical.
As with all of the important characters, important side characters.
It happens.
Of the show,
so this keeps happening. It's like at this point, whenever you introduce a new side character, everybody's just like, okay, when are they going to come back? Are they going to be important later? Take notes on this. Quick, write that down.
Exactly. And I mean, there are side characters where people are like, okay, when are they coming back? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I've never planned for them.
Yep.
So people keep expecting it of me, but to be fair, there are a lot of side characters that have simply, talked about and then discarded. So, and people actually like them, so I feel guilty, so now I might have to bring them back too. I don't know. But with Danny was intended to last more than one episode, even from the beginning, but there was, he had way less of a presence than he does now. And that is in part because, I just wanted to have Edward in more episodes, and also because the relationship between Danny and Sauvard became way more prominent as time went on, and I just think that Danny is a really great emotional center for the story, especially for a character like Sauvard, who is just doom and gloom, and, he has gone through so much, but he's also done so much, and you would think that a character like that, despite being on a path to redemption, would have had all of the warmth sucked out of him after everything that he did. And to have that warmth kind of be siphoned out by a completely normal, completely ordinary, but very warm person like Danny is just, it tickles me. It tickles me as a storytelling.
It intrigues me, for sure. I love it when, really hard, cold, hard-hearted characters just absolutely melt the moment a soft teddy bear of a person comes up and, like, worms their way into their hearts.
Yes.
It's one of my favorite little tropes.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of favorite tropes, but, like, that's one of my big favorites where I'm just like, oh my god, every single time. Like, oh my god, the hard-hearted character just got really soft because of this soft teddy bear character. Oh my god.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that when I was discussing with you the idea about Danny, I remember talking about how Sauvard had so many assumptions, but not the ones you would think. Like, he's not, for some reason, like, I was like, this guy who is kind of a bigot back then is very much, like, understanding what a trans man is right now.
Mhm.
But to be fair, back then he was also weirdly progressive for the kind of person that he was. And I think, yeah, going on to Sauvard, because we're kind of going back and forth between them, Sauvard's such an interesting character, and I'm so happy to have him be a bisexual character, and just a queer character in general.
Yes.
Because one of the things I enjoy about Hainai is having this story full of gravitas and interesting characters, having them pretty much all be queer with very few exceptions, just because that's something I want to do, given that I grew up in a time where hardly any media that I was able to consume was queer, even though I was.
Yeah.
So now...
Growing up, we basically had nothing.
Exactly. And all the little scraps of representation that we could get, even if they were, quote-unquote problematic, we appreciated them so much because it was the only view, like, it was the only thing we could see of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to make a show where every character of many facets, of complex personalities, could represent somebody or intrigue somebody, would also be queer, and have their queerness, or transness, in Danny's case, be another facet of, like, intrigue and something that resonates with somebody. Because, not every queer character will resonate with everybody. There are a lot of queer stories that don't resonate with me at all, so I want there to just be a large quantity of them with different qualities, and that goes for characters as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we've discussed this in another episode previously, but the thing about representation, not just queer representation, but representation with the different types of ethnicities that exist out in the world, is you can't put people into a box, okay? There's no such thing as perfect representation. What's perfect for me is not going to be perfect for you, and it's certainly not going to be perfect for everybody else that fits that specific demographic, right? Like, so much bisexual representation is like, oh, you're a player, oh, you're going for both sides, oh, you're super sexy, and this is a slight side tangent, but it proves my example, so bear with me. My uncle played a small part, well, I shouldn't call it small. He played a part in a TV show called My Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and his character was bisexual. And he got so much fan mail and met so many fans who were like, your character means so much to me, just because his bisexuality as that character wasn't sexualized. He was like, I'm a guy, I like men and I like women, and the reaction to the other people in that show, the other characters in the show, was just, okay, so what? Moving on. And it was treated as so normally that it made a lot of people really fucking happy. And that's the thing, like,
yes,
I'm sure there were some people who watched the show and went, oh, I can't stand this bi rep, it's so stupid. Which is fine, you don't have to. But it's important to have various different facets of representation. And good representation is good, like, we want to have that, but more importantly, I think we need to have humanist representation. Because not everybody is going to be a good person and a perfect person. People are going to make mistakes, they're going to be awful, terrible characters sometimes, and that's what makes a story interesting. It would be one thing if it was like, oh, we only have one gay character in our show, and they're the evil bad guy, because what kind of message are you sending with that? But it's something else entirely when you have a wide variety of characters, like the cast of Hainai, where there are so many different characters who are bisexual, who are a lesbian, or they are gay, they're transgender, whatever the case may be, and you have this wide spectrum of people who make human mistakes, who are relatable in various different ways, because then you're showing a wider scope of what representation looks like. And that's one thing that I really appreciate about shows like Hainai, because it's not, oh, how do I cater to the widest demographic possible, or how do I make sure this one character being represented is super perfect and doesn't offend anybody, but rather, it's coming from the lens of, how do I write this character as humanly and realistically human as possible, and then just, oh yeah, they happen to be bisexual, and that's just a part of them, and that's not the main point of them. If that makes any sense at all, I don't know.
No, that's wonderful. And also, to your point, I wanted to also go on a small tangent. Well, we're just going to go on tangents in this episode. No, but, like, I had a pet peeve. So I absolutely adore the video game Dragon Age Inquisition. And they have a fantastic many different characters of different sexualities. And they even have, one of the earliest trans characters in video games.
Mm-hmm.
It is great. Like, the representation in that game is great.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing that I hate that they did is that they originally had the main, and this is spoilers for Dragon Age Inquisition, sorry guys, but I'm sure if you've seen the new Dragon Age game, then it's not a spoiler at all. The main villain, and the most powerful villain in the entire franchise, Solus, they originally were going to make him bisexual. But they did not want to lean into the evil bisexual trope. Even though Solus is awesome as a character, he should have been bisexual. He should have been a bisexual man. And I don't agree that they scrubbed away his bisexuality and just made him a straight guy, because that makes him even more boring. that takes away a part of him that is I just think that was dumb. I just think it's dumb that Solus is not bisexual. Although a fun fact is that there is a glitch in Dragon Age Inquisition where he is still bisexual in a single scene because, and this is the other thing, Solus only goes for elves because he's an elf racist, but there is a scene where he is flirting with the elf character in Dragon Age where, again, he can only flirt with female characters.
Oh, that's
But there's a scene where if you flirt with him as an elf character, there will suddenly be a male voice coming out of the female character.
That's really funny.
Yeah, because they originally had him be bisexual, and then they erased it, but they didn't erase it completely. And that's why I think bisexual Solus is still canon. That being said, the reason I bring it up is because here we have Sauvard, who is an evil capitalist.
Yes.
Or was an evil capitalist. He was a terrible person.
He was a terrible person.
Yes, he was the big bad until he wasn't, until his own hubris destroyed him. And he would, fit in wonderfully with neoliberals of this day and age.
Yeah.
He would absolutely, have no qualms at all, or the version of him when he was a villain absolutely would have had no qualms taking other people's lives for his own benefit and profit, and a greater good that only exists to him.
Yep.
And he's bisexual.
And he's bisexual.
Is that an evil bisexual? Well, yes. And that's great, because he's a great character. And I don't agree that, we are leaning into harmful tropes. If you have a game full of bisexuals, by the way.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah, the other thing, too, is, I love that you bring up Solus as an example because I hate his character.
Yeah,
and I'm going to try to work. I'm going to have to work really hard not to turn this into we're talking about Dragon Age the podcast.
Listen, I also hate him, but I think he's a great character. I hate him personally when playing the game.
Because they held back.
I think.
And this is my only point.
That's true.
They held back on his character because they were trying to do too many things with him, but they were also trying to hide too much about him, which made him come across as very boring and uninteresting, and then suddenly, he's like the big guy after all,
so fair.
Which felt like such a switch to me that I hated it, because if I can't see the steps leading up to it, then it's a bad plot twist and you did a bad job.
That's fair.
Not to say that the writers did a bad job, but the execution wasn't quite to where I felt like it could have been.
Yeah, but
so
that's
the fact that they held off on... It is, very much so, which is, again, I'm trying very hard not to make this become, we're talking about Dragon Age the podcast, but...
We're just going to rename the entire episode, then we talk about Dragon Age for an hour.
But because they held off on him being bisexual, because they were so scared of falling into the evil bisexual trope, that they took away something that could have made him more interesting, leading into the eventual reveal at the end of Dragon Age Inquisition, and I find that a shame, because and a lot of the writing decisions that they made were made because they were cut for budget reasons and for time, and I respect that. I understand the reasons that they did the things they did. I don't hate the writers for it. It's just a shame that a fear of being seen as falling into a specific trope made them lose out on something that could have made him very interesting.
Yes.
And a lot of people will disagree with me with that, and that's fine. And kind of leading into bad tropes, too, you also have to take into account the time period that some of these things were written. In the early days of, the early to mid-2000s when Inquisition came out, Krem was the only trans representation. Yeah, mid-2000s.
Mid-2010s. Hello?
The passage of time is an enigma that I cannot wrap my head around. Anyway.
2014.
Anyway, when it came out, there was still, there was the whole, pro-LGBT movement that was really getting into swing, but trans people were still being left out of the conversation, and Krem was the very first genuinely good faith take on trans rep that was coming out. Mass Effect Andromeda dropped the ball really fucking hard with a character that most people in the community didn't like and agree with.
Mm-hmm.
But Krem, at the time, was amazing rep.
Mm-hmm.
And now that we have so much more trans rep out there, we can look back at Krem and go, oh, they really fumbled it in a lot of ways. But that's kind of taking that character out of context and comparing it to what we have now.
Yep.
It's the same thing with representation across history. For example, Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yes.
The main character calls himself, I believe, a transvestite, which was a pro-trans word used back in the day. Like, that was their word. It was my community's word for how we identified ourselves. Transvestite didn't become a slur until people started saying, oh, that's an evil thing, you shouldn't be that thing, that's bad, and started using that word against us.
Mm-hmm.
So nowadays, people don't use that word unless you're, like, from an older queer scene. Like, if you're a queer elder, you're a trans elder.
Yep.
So, looking back on it, that seems like bad representation now. But it wasn't then.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I see podcasts and characters like Sauvard now, where we don't really have to worry as much about falling into that evil bisexual trope like the writers of BioWare did for Solus, because there wasn't as much positive bisexual representation at that time period versus all of the more positive representation that we have now in characters like Daryl Whitefeather or all of the characters that we have as bisexual now, right?
So true, so true. And yes, I do absolutely respect, like, the thought process, because the writers of that game are also queer, and they had so much love for the characters they were writing.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
Even though I disagree, I was like, yes, I know they made that decision specifically because they wanted to be sensitive and careful, especially for a worldwide video game, an international video game that was hitting, like, millions of people.
Exactly. Which is, again, why, like, it's a shame now.
Yes.
Back then, I think a lot of people had just been like, oh, great, another evil bisexual, which is what they wanted to avoid. I respect the decision that they made, and I'm glad that they did that because, you know, they were respectful of the community that they were a part of, and I appreciate that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And now I get to write my evil bisexual.
Exactly.
My formerly evil bisexual.
Exactly. And I think it's also a thing to just shout out to those creators.
Mm-hmm.
They paved the way for something better. By putting that foot in the door for characters like Solus or not Solus, but characters like Krem, who are actually transgender.
Yep.
And to have the positive representation of all of the bisexual characters in Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition. Why opened the door for people to later come in with their more nuanced characters, their more morally gray characters.
Absolutely.
Who also fit within the queer spectrum, the LGBT spectrum. And, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I will shout them out by name. The writers for Dragon Age Inquisition were David Gator and Trick Weeks, who is, by the way, non-binary, and Karen Weeks, their partner, who is the editor.
Yeah.
They are lovely people. I have chatted with Trick Weeks and Karen Weeks quite often back in my super fan Dragon Age days. And yeah.
Yeah,
anyway,
fantastic.
This is not a Dragon Age podcast.
Not a Dragon Age podcast, but we do want to shout out these very incredibly talented and lovely writers who created my favorite series.
Yeah.
I don't think they're ever going to listen to this, but if they do...
Well, I'm going to tag Trick Weeks.
No! I don't need them to hear me fangirling.
Anyway. So, okay.
This is not a Dragon Age podcast. Going back to
not a Dragon Age podcast. Okay. Going back to Sauvard, because we're going to talk about the other characters of that era as well. So Sauvard himself, and I say, he's bisexual because we know he's with Danny now.
Yes.
But what's interesting is that you would not expect it from a man who, was alive 150 years ago, like, who was born in the late 1800s and was, fully in his 50s by the 1920s to 30s. So it's like, how did he realize he was bisexual? And I think it is like a deconstruction of who he is as a man, because back in the day, when he was younger, he had a wife who he loved very much. And, with a little bit of thematic play here, sorry, I said that completely wrong. With a little bit of, like, playing with the themes, her favorite song was actually Danny Boy. And so Danny already sparked his interest from that moment, and then sort of, like, he fell in love with Danny's warmth, which is also why he fell in love with his wife in the first place. And we talk about how Sauvard is a cold man, but, as a man of that era, especially one in his position, he believed he had to take on a certain role that would be balanced out by his wife. That was, like, his view of sexuality, but is also his view of his relationship with the wife that he loved, who died fairly young or at least, like, died when his son was fairly young.
Mm-hmm.
And so he could not balance that out. He couldn't, like, as a single parent, he was not able to balance that out. But he still very smartly made sure that his son had people around him, and made sure that his son was with the Weekses, because,
Mm-hmm.
as we have said, he grew up with the Weekses, and that's how he fell in love with Jack Robin.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll chat about these five characters from the era of the Benefactor,
Mm-hmm.
his besties, who he misses. We know he misses them. We're going to talk about it in the B-sides, but,
yes, we'll get more into that later for sure.
We know who that was,
Mm-hmm.
and he talked about his besties. So we're going to talk about his besties. First of all, we're going to talk about young Will. And
young Will.
I realize suddenly this is a very big minefield of me not spoiling the certain things about the Benefactor.
We're going to have to tread very carefully to not spoil some things about the Benefactor.
Yes.
Maybe we should avoid talking about the
Lord.
Benefactor until later.
Maybe.
Let's just give it like a very short TLDR, and then we'll talk about everybody else.
Well, because this is the reason we're laughing about it. We know the Benefactor's name already, obviously we know, because I'm the writer, and I've told Edward about this.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever we talk about the friend group of, young Will, Jack Robin, Marianne, and CJ, and of course, the Benefactor, I am inclined to say his name. And I shouldn't.
Yes.
I always, whenever I talk about them as a group, I'm like, oh, and, uh-huh. And, yeah.
We have to be maybe we should just call him Benny, just...
Benny, okay, you're right.
Just
we'll
for the sake of shortening it.
But yes, confirmation, his name is not Benny, so...
It's not Benny.
It is not.
Benny is short for Benefactor.
Just
to make that clear.
Bendy and the Factor.
Bendy and the Factor.
Yes, so... Young Will, he was a shy and sickly young boy who grew up mostly without his mother, although he did grow up with her when he was younger. And that made him very shy. That made him very, like, a shrinking violet. And he was balanced out by Jack Robin. They fell in love when they were children. They were playing together in the backyard, and they would play under this tree. And we know about the one time that they had a kitten who unfortunately died young, and they buried her under this tree. And that is the kitten that would eventually become Pocket the Cat, because all of their love existed under this tree, from childhood to teenage years to adulthood. This was their favorite spot. This was their spot where they fell in love, and this is where they continued to love each other over the years, and that love sort of got absorbed into that space, at which point, when Sauvard eventually buries his focus there, the focus starts to absorb that love, which is why Pocket is such a unique being, rather than absorbing fear, although it does have the power of fear that Sauvard put into it. It became something completely different than what it should have been. It got its own identity in a weird way, and absorbed the memory of love of these two boys. And that's how strong their love was, that they transformed this entire magical item into a sentient being that is full of love, and just likes to sit, just likes to cuddle, and get pets, and lie in the sun, and do cat things, and sometimes transform into a body horror amalgamation of all the things that it has absorbed.
As is typical of a cat,
Yeah, typical cat
how
things.
black cats are.
Yeah, exactly. And then there is...
My evil amalgamation eats carpet fuzz.
Yes, she does. She likes to play with string. And it is really funny that sometimes, Donner is, like, playing with her, and then she will, like, do some absolutely heinous, like, body horror shit. And he's just sitting there like, okay.
Okay,
all right.
I guess that just happened. Okay.
All right, cool. Anyway, Jack Robin is somebody who is my favorite in that friend group. Quite frankly, he's my favorite character of all of them. And you can tell he's my favorite because he gets to have the most fun out of all of them. He gets to be the most charismatic and interesting character in that group, even though I did eventually kill him very young. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Sometimes the most
Jack
important
Robin.
Character, if he disappears, like, breaks the entire dynamic,
Yeah.
Sometimes when you have a character everybody loves, if they die, everything is ruined forever.
Yep.
I'm only talking about the past. I'm definitely not talking about the future.
Nope.
Nope.
We're not going there. Nope, it's not a thing. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Huh.
Jack Robin is an anomaly.
Yeah.
He's the Spider's George of Hainai. Don't worry about it.
George. I do love Spider's George, Jack Robin. But yes, Jack Robin is also intriguing because there's so much to say about him. even though he only lived for that long, there are other characters where I'm like, okay, I bring him back for a ghost, I bring him back, you know, in a focus, I bring him back in stories, and so there is so much more about them that you learn. But with Jack Robin, you know everything about him, give or take, and he's gone. He only lived that long, and he's gone, but he resonates across time. He is the one that the benefactor trusted the most, more than anybody in the world, and he knew something about the benefactor that the benefactor did not want anyone else to know. And, yeah. And also, regarding his sexuality, because this is sort of becoming a character discussion rather than a discussion about their queerness, but that's fine. This is a reward for people who really like the lore.
It's fine.
But regarding his sexuality, he is both pansexual and extremely promiscuous.
Yes.
And that is not true of all the characters who are pansexual, but me being a pansexual creator, I do tend to, do that. There are 3 pansexual characters in this show, and 2 of them are promiscuous, and 1 of them is not, but she is in a polyamorous relationship. So I don't know what that says about me as a pansexual woman who's writing these characters, but yes, Jack Robin is very promiscuous, which, you know, people might ask, like, why, if he was with young Will, why was he promiscuous? And the thing is, young Will, he was too afraid and shy and uncertain to have sex. I'm gonna, like, out them right now, but basically, young Will was not really a social butterfly, and certainly he was very nervous and anxious, and he was also very nervous and anxious around sex. And he and Jack Robin, you know, were fine with that. They loved each other. They kissed each other. They cuddled together. They loved each other that way, but whether or not they had sex, it was probably just not something they did regularly.
Yeah.
If at all. I never decided if they did. I just know that young Will probably wasn't very comfortable with it. In point of fact, that just wasn't his personality. And so he was also not against Jack Robin just going out and having fun. Because if he was, you know, he fell in love with Jack Robin, and maybe he's like, I need to learn how to do this to make him happy, but Jack Robin was like, you don't need to do anything that makes you uncomfortable. And that was the relationship that they had. And Jack Robin, like, you know, comforted him, like, listen, I am out there fucking sucking, but I love you. You're the one that I love, and if you want me to stop, I'll stop. But young Will was like, no, it's fine. It's fine. You know, and maybe at one point they would have had a discussion to end that, but at the time young Will just was okay with it because he himself was kind of ambivalent towards sex. And Jack Robin was, as I said, fucking and sucking all the time. And I think I've also said that he probably had, like, syphilis.
Yeah, so he probably would have died at some point anyway. He probably would have died young regardless.
No, I mean, lots of people lived with syphilis. It just wasn't pretty.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have stayed pretty, is what I'm going to say about that. But
yeah.
He would have maybe survived.
He would have faked his death because he'd be like, he'd pull a howl. I'm no longer pretty. I can't be seen in this world anymore.
Yeah. I mean, probably, like, the best case scenario, if he had survived, would have been him, like, asking the benefactor, like, hey, can you give me a spell to get rid of my syphilis?
Yeah.
Benefactor would have been like, fine. He would have developed a spell to end syphilis. That would have been the change in the timeline.
The spell to end syphilis. The good ending is where Jack Robin doesn't die and the benefactor invents a spell that ends syphilis.
Yeah, no, for real. And listen, I wanted to make it clear that I am very sex positive, but a man in that era having sex with a lot of people
without protection in most cases,
yeah, maybe with protection, maybe not, but yes, he likely would have gotten syphilis given the demographics of STDs at that era. STIs now.
Yeah.
As somebody who has done thorough research on STIs, don't ask me why. No, it's fine. I actually did, like, proper research for it because I did, like, a video and, like, an article about it, so. Now that we're done talking about Jack Robin syphilis.
Sorry for the listeners who didn't want to hear about that.
Listen, we have to have a very frank discussion about STIs and sexual health, because you can actually, in this day and age, get a lot of vaccination and a lot of medicine to fix things like syphilis and gonorrhea and chlamydia, and those are actually things. And, you know, having PrEP, like, genuinely, I'm not even kidding when I say this, like, no matter how many of those you get, there are ways to mitigate or even just completely eradicate them. Not all of them, but many of them. And, you know, you should get to know your reproductive health so that you can find out the ways to do that just in case it happens to you. It makes me think of Grant O'Brien getting syphilis, like, twice or something, I think. I think it was syphilis. Anyway, Getting off that topic. I love our topics. We're like getting off of Dragon Age, getting off of syphilis.
We have fun here.
We have fun here.
See, this is what happens when we don't have listener questions. We just go on random tangents instead of talking about what we're actually supposed to be talking about.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, guys. I'm going on a trip, and I'm going to be away for a while, so this is the last thing you're going to get for a little bit.
Don't apologize. I'm having fun. The listeners are just going to have to deal with it.
Yeah. Oh, my lord. But yes, okay. So,
fine.
we're going to talk about Marianne Weeks. So, Marianne, who did not have syphilis.
Just to make that clear.
Just to make that clear. Marianne, I love her character internally. Like, I love the internality of her character. But I do think that she was so, not cold, but very, she had like a bit of a coldness about her that I think makes her not less interesting, but certainly like more straightforward to talk about in terms of like she was a very goal-based person. She was very like, goal-centric, if that makes sense. And we've talked about how she was able to justify all the things that she was doing, and I like her as a very flawed but ultimately good character because she thought she was doing the right thing the entire time. And I think her and Sauvard were the most similar characters in the entire show of High and Nigh. Although Sauvard was much less, how you say, like, he did not have the guilt that she did, and he did not have the connection to the people that she did. And she was a very philanthropic kind of person, but she was still kind of disconnected from the people the way, unlike Jack Robin. So it was interesting to have her experience loss earlier than Sauvard and change her tune, change the way that she acted, and trying to save people, but still being very individualistic in the way that she saw herself, like thinking that she was the one who had to do it because she was the one who made the mistake. And I think she and Sauvard are sort of the reflections of each other in sort of she was actually Sauvard's successor in terms of a full character rather than the benefactor. Even though the benefactor is his successor in terms of like being the leader of elders, she is the one who succeeds Sauvard in terms of character development, in terms of the kind of people that they are.
Yep.
They are very big mirrors of each other. But she achieved a sort of moral clarity and moral uprightness that Sauvard did not achieve until he had already killed like 200 people. So, she is like a good person, but I want it to be very clear that it took a very big loss for her to become that way. And I think she would have been very complicit and even actively harmful if she did not experience that sort of crash to reality. And I love her as a character.
And I love her too.
Again.
She's such a
evil.
Fascinating character.
Not actually
like,
evil.
again.
She's not evil.
No, not... I mean, listen, to a certain extent, when you are born exceedingly wealthy, you fundamentally live a different life than the rest of, like, most of the civilization. You experience a life that is so free of personal hardships. Not to say that you're necessarily free from, like, emotional, psychological, or physical abuse, because that can happen no matter what kind of family you're a part of. But you're free from having to struggle for your own survival in terms of monetary wealth. You likely will never have to get a real job. You can just inherit whatever job your parents have set up for you. And barring unique, social circumstances where you decide you don't want to be a part of that life, you will just have everything handed to you on a silver platter. And a lot of people in these rich people structures grow up thinking that they are doing genuine hard work to get this kind of money, to earn this kind of money, when it's just being given to them. And for Marianne, I think for her, she sees the struggle that people like her go through, but she's also removed enough from it because she's wealthy. So she has that idea of like, well, I'm better than some of these other people because I know better, and I'm in this position where I can be better. And she was complicit when, what was the guy's name? Antoine? When Antoine was murdered in cold blood, she didn't say anything. She was fine with it. She was like, this is a necessary sacrifice. And that's a very evil mindset to have. When you say, yeah, it's okay to kill people, even one person is fine, like, that's a fundamentally evil thing to do. And the mental gymnastics you have to do to yourself to justify that is a compelling thing in a character. In reality, it's a very horrific thing to do, but in a character, it's a very interesting and compelling thing to do. And it's even made more interesting by the fact that if Marianne hadn't had her own severe loss with her brother, she probably would have continued thinking like, oh, that's a necessary sacrifice. Like, we're benefactors of humanity. We're funding the arts and the sciences, and we're putting money into these communities. We're building up civilization. We're making things better. It's okay if we're killing people because we're making the world a better place. Which is, again, like, that's fascist logic. That's not a good thing to think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that without her own personal loss, she might never have reached the realization of, oh, this is an evil thing we're doing.
Oh, absolutely.
And the same thing with Sauvard. It took him much longer, but he eventually got to that point too. And I think it's also interesting how both of them ended up being very self-sacrificial.
Yes, yeah, they kind of, like, went in the other extreme direction, and I think that's why they're literally, like, it's almost like, that's his daughter. That's his daughter, and that's her father.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also kind of, like, equals in that way. Like, they never saw each other as father and daughter, the way that Benefactor wanted Sauvard to be his dad. Because she was, like, I think rather than, you know, it's almost like you put them beside each other, and you're like, they have the exact same, like, mannerisms,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And you're like, are you sure she's not your daughter? Are you sure he's not her dad?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no, they would deny it to the ends of the earth, and they'd be right, but also they would literally just be like mirror images of each other when they,
Mm-hmm.
you know, when they talk and act. But that being said, I do want to, like, go into CJ a little bit, because
Yes,
CJ is such a
CJ.
unique character as being one of the few survivors of that era, you know,
Mm-hmm.
relatively unscathed, other than the fact that she lost the love of her life, and that has scarred her for forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I love CJ because she's such a romantic.
She
I
is.
think that, you know, in many cases, a lot of female characters are sort of diminished to their partner, and I think that can be very, you know, that can be very belittling to a character, especially a female character, for
Oh,
how
absolutely.
much we've seen that in stories. But I think in CJ's case, she is a very classic character where she is a female character who basically, like, thinks about her lost love, who is, like, kind of defined by her relationship and her romance, but at the same time, that's what makes her compelling,
Mm-hmm.
rather than, like, taking away from her own character. Because she was, you know, she was like a cosmopolitan, she was like just a very shallow kind of person, and yet she has found depth because of her sadness. She is, you know, she acts like she doesn't know what's going on, but she knows everything that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she tries to be ignorant, but she can't be. And I think that's always a fun character to have. I think Ashvin is somewhat similar in that, you know, he was sort of ignorant of the magic that he had possessed until very recently.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he didn't do it on purpose, he just didn't think it was real. Whereas CJ is like, she was trying to ignore things in order to keep her life uncomplicated,
Mm-hmm.
but ignoring it only brought her suffering. And now, even though she still tries to do it, she still, like, puts up a front that she does it, she just can't. And that's why she helps them, even though she makes it very clear she doesn't want to. You know?
Mm-hmm.
She does not want to be here, but one, she cares about them enough to do it, and two, she absolutely adores Laura, she loves Laura,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's like, well, I guess I'm just gonna have to help out, even though she has been weighed down and, you know, just tired of the years, because even though she loves Laura, Laura was not the love of her life, Marianne was, and she
Mhm.
lost Marianne a long time ago, and that still weighs on her, and I
Mhm.
think it makes for a very interesting, tired, jaded character,
Mm-hmm.
who is still, despite everything, willing to help those that she loves.
Mm-hmm.
And I do love her as a character, even though she's very by her own choice on the sidelines, you know?
Yes.
It's just a fascinating character to have, and I always imagine her as this, like, Parisian lady smoking on a long cigarette with her shades on and, like, a big hat,
Yeah.
and just, like, trying to enjoy herself in Europe or something.
Exactly.
She's doing her best.
She's doing
Our
her best.
wonderful, beautiful, fashionable old lesbian who does not look old, but she certainly carries that weight of the years.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Like, she feels every single one of those years she was living without Marianne.
Yes. And even though she claims she doesn't remember anything over the years, which is true, like, you know, I think that the elders in particular don't have a vaster array of, like, memory than other people, so they have to discard a lot of things, but I think the things that she claims to have forgotten are still there. She just pretends that she doesn't remember them, even though she does.
Mm-hmm.
There are still things that stay in her mind and have been sort of burned into there. And while she denies remembering anything, she remembers. Oh, she does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. And they would have to, like, ask her about the past if they want to get to know the benefactor more, even though she's not going to give a very flattering picture of who he was.
Mm-hmm.
But that's fine.
Yep.
And yeah, and I think, like, in terms of the friend group, as I said, she was ignoring a lot of stuff, so I don't think she could give a lot of, like, insight into the secret machinations between the benefactor and Marianne, but she certainly could read their relationships, and she knew sort of the social dynamics, and she knew as soon as Jack Robin was dead that it was all gone. She knew before anyone else. She was like, well, that's it. You know, that was like, I think she just took a sip of her wine and was like, that's it. That's all. We're done. This is the end.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so fun to imagine the tragedy of it all.
It's my favorite thing.
Mm-hmm.
Another fun thing about going back to the beginning of the conversation just a little bit of, like, the different types of representation that exist.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of bury your gaze as a trope isn't really something that we necessarily have to worry about anymore, because we have so much more positive representation where the gay characters don't die at the very end.
Yep.
That we can kind of play around with that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Robin and Marianne both died and caused a lot of grief for their respective lovers.
Mm-hmm.
And we lost young Will as a result of that, which is technically burying your gaze.
Mm-hmm.
But because we have so many other queer characters in Hainai, it's not really a big deal. I mean, it's a big deal in terms of plot, but, like, in the grand scheme of, like, tropes and stuff, it's a non-issue, because there are other characters in the story.
Yes, exactly.
And I remember listening to The Adventure Zone when it was first coming out during the very first Balance arc. And during Petals to the Metal, Griffin wrote the two lesbian characters. This is going to be a bit of a spoiler for anybody who hasn't listened to the podcast yet. Please do, it's very good. But he had two lesbian characters die at the end of the race. And later on, he went, that's my bad. I didn't realize that bury your gaze was a thing. And at the time this was coming out, we still didn't have a lot of lesbian representation in media.
Mm-hmm.
It was getting better. It was improved. Dragon Age Inquisition had come out, and there are lesbians in that, like Sarah, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But Sarah's a different type of lesbian, and I'm not getting into that. And so he later on changed it so that they became dryads, because he wanted to amend this accidental bury your gaze trope that he'd fallen into. And it would have been less of a problem if there had been other queer characters visible in the story. And it was later fixed with two characters who I'm suddenly forgetting their names. One of them is Carrie, and the other one is the giant half-orc lady. I can't remember her name. Anyway, they became lesbians, and it's a whole thing, and it was better. But it wouldn't have been as much of a problem if there had been other gay characters that were prominently featured within the story. But because this was an adventure that he was writing with his three brothers and his dad, that wasn't really feasible. And he had to apologize for that because he accidentally fell into that trope. Mm. But when you're writing with so many different queer characters, it's less, oh, I'm burying my gaze, and more, I'm telling a tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing that I love about fiction, is sometimes fiction is sad. I love a good tragedy because it lets you sit with the emotions of the characters, and that compels me more into the story that is being told. It's not sad for the sake of being sad. You're not killing these characters like, ooh, I'm having a great time, I'm so, like, and we're never going to worry about them ever again, and there's no impact whatsoever. It's like, no, they had a very real impact.
Mm-hmm.
CJ isn't a sad, lonely lesbian for the sake of being a sad, lonely lesbian. It's just an aspect of her character. Marianne didn't die just because you wanted to have a sad, lonely lesbian. Oh, I'm so sad about my wife. Like, no. She had her own character arc. She was her own character. And the dead characters still have weight and are being felt in the current story even now, because their deaths are still affecting people.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes a good tragedy a good tragedy.
Yeah.
And sets it apart from other stories that exist out there, where the characters were killed just for the sake of shock value,
mm-hmm.
you know?
Absolutely. And I think, like, that's kind of the main aspect of why I felt, quote-unquote, confident enough to kill these characters.
Yes.
I think that there is a very real concern by a lot of very sensitive and, you know, I say sensitive, like, in a positive way.
Yes.
Like, very, like, empathetic people who are doing writing, but worrying too much about, like, what if I am doing this representation wrong? And I've always talked about this because I'm very, vocal about representation, both queer and trans, but also with, BIPOC representation or, Black, Indigenous, POC representation.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell people, there are certain ways that you can write things without worrying about, certain tropes or certain possibly offensive, expressions of, these characters or trends that have come before them.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I also tell people, well, here's the thing. If you have an entire cast of queer characters, then all of the queer tropes that you're worried about are usually going to go away. Because it was usually based on the lack of queer characters that these tropes arose in the first place.
Exactly.
And when there is no lack, then there is no concern. And there is still, obviously you could still write a bad character, but if you have a whole cast of queer characters, it's not because they're queer that they are a bad character.
Exactly.
Sometimes they are just characters, and with the way that the, show or story has been portrayed, they are one in a sea of queer characters in which their representation is not the be-all, end-all of representation in the story. And similarly, why did I say it like that? And similarly, you get the same effect when you have a diverse set of characters, especially, for example, this is not in my show, but it's certainly in other shows. When you have a show that is, filled to the brim with Black characters, it is sort of this wonderful thing where even if some characters fall into certain tropes, because the entire show is Black characters, then you know that it's not being done just because of anti-Black racism, right?
Exactly.
There is, a proper sort of, variety of characters, all of whom get to be their own person, all of whom get to be flawed, or even maybe fall into certain, character tropes or stereotypes, and yet, at the same time, you know it's not just because the writer thinks of Black people as one thing,
Exactly.
And a similar thing can happen.
It's the trap of putting people into a monolith, or thinking that somebody has to represent an entire community of people.
Yes, and what this reveals when you have a show like that, when it's all Black characters, or let's say all Filipino characters, etc., you find out that certain stereotypes exist because those people exist. The problem is that when you think that those people represent the entirety of a certain group, that is the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not the problem to portray those types of characters because, again, stereotypes exist for a reason. It is a problem when you diminish an entire group of people to those stereotypes.
Exactly.
And the same thing goes for, queer representation. I remember the Q-Force TV series on Netflix, and it was marketed like garbage. But I watched it because I was, kind of curious, okay, what's the show? It was amazing. It was amazing queer representation, marketed like absolute shit.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt so bad, because I watched the show and I was like, wow, that is a wonderful variety of queer characters, and they had a token straight man, and it was just a fun, adventurous little, 7 or 8 out of 10 cartoon, but it never got renewed because of the terrible marketing.
Yep.
And I think about that sometimes. And for people who are curious, Q-Force is actually a decent show, and if you ever saw that trailer, you should watch it. Anyway, all that being said, I think this is a good place to end the episode because...
Probably.
Yeah, we talk about, queer characters being, a sort of variety of different personalities, and some of them may fall into tropes that could be harmful if there was a lack of queer representation. But we sort of skirt that trap because, again, in Hainai, 90% of the characters are queer.
Exactly.
We have our token straight people, but we were able to name them in a single post in a jokey straight pride post that we made on Tumblr.
Yep, exactly.
So we will still do another episode of this because obviously we have not covered all the queer characters in Hainai. But this was fun.
We got too distracted.
Yeah, we got too distracted. But this was fun. And yeah, this was meant to replace the B-sides because I'm so sorry, everybody, I forgot to ask for questions. That's my bad. But I hope you enjoyed this. And absolutely, I'll be back in August with new episodes of Hainai. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoy. And if you have any other requests for characters you want to hear about in the next episode, please do request them in the comments or on our socials at HainaiPod, HINAYPOD.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want me to cover any other unscripted, topics on an episode, let me know. I also have done an episode about the cultural background of Hainai, and I do plan to do more of those, especially in terms of the Tagalog titles of Hainai. I wanted to make an episode about that to sort of explain the meaning and some secret meanings behind the titles of Hainai, even though I'm sure all of you just took me at face value when I translated them into English. I promise there are tricks. There are tricks in my translation, I swear. But I will do that in another episode. But in the meantime, thank you so much. Thank you for joining me. And thank you, Edward, even though we were supposed to record a totally different thing. This is a very fun discussion.
We didn't talk about any of the things that we were supposed to talk about, and that's okay.
Yes, absolutely.
We had fun.
Yes, thank you so much, and have a good night, everybody. Bye.
Have a good night. Bye.